A black woman was asked to give up her business class seat for a white passenger, but Vin Diesel witnessed the entire incident, and soon after, the entire flight crew was fired. What would you do if someone tried to take what was rightfully yours, simply because they believed they were more important? On what seemed like an ordinary flight, this woman's calm yet unwavering resolve turned an act of arrogance into a powerful lesson no one on that plane would ever forget. Stay tuned, because this is a story of quiet strength, unexpected twists, and ultimate karma. But before we begin, tell us, where are you watching from? I'll go first. I'm currently in New York. The hum of jet engines outside Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport pulsed softly through the window as Denise Whitaker settled into Seat 1C of American Airlines Flight 907, bound for Seattle. The late afternoon light filtered through the clouds, bathing the cabin in a golden warmth that made her close her eyes for a brief moment of gratitude. It had been a long road, too long, at times, to this seat. She'd grown up in East St. Louis in the late 60s, one of 5 kids raised by a single mother who cleaned houses and taught her children never to let anyone else define their worth. Denise had worked her way through college waiting tables and landed a job in tech when few women, let alone black women, were ever in the room. Now, at 52, she was the COO of a cloud infrastructure company and on her way to finalize a groundbreaking partnership with a Fortune 500 firm. Her seat, 1C, wasn't just a place on a plane. It was a hard-earned space in a world that too often told women like her they belonged at the back, if anywhere at all. The cabin was still boarding when Denise opened her laptop, scanning through presentation slides one last time. Her assistant had color-coded everything per her preference, and the digital notes reflected years of experience, long nights, and quiet triumphs. She reached for the cup of black coffee the flight attendant had brought earlier, her fingers brushing the gold ring she wore on her right hand, a memento from her mother's last Christmas. A rustle in the aisle made her glance up. A tall, slender woman in her early 40s, draped in a cream trench coat and holding a leather designer bag, approached. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, her eyes scanning the cabin with entitlement that needed no words. She stopped in front of Denise's seat, pursing her lips as if she'd just tasted something bitter. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clipped, like she was used to getting what she wanted. "I believe you're in my seat." Denise raised an eyebrow and looked down at her boarding pass, then held it up with a calm smile. 1C booked 2 weeks ago. "I see," the woman said, her tone not softening in the least. "Well, I'm Executive Platinum, and I always get the aisle in the first row. There must be a mix-up. They probably upgraded you last minute." The assumption hung in the air like a bad smell. Denise exhaled slowly, willing herself not to react. "No upgrade. I paid for this seat. Direct booking through my company account." The woman hesitated for a moment, then forced a thin smile. "Of course. But still, it would mean a lot to me if you would switch. I have a bad knee, and the aisle seat helps." Denise studied her carefully. "I'm sorry about your knee," she said gently. "But I have meetings first thing in the morning, and this seat gives me the space I need to prepare." Just then, a flight attendant, a young man named Jordan with a polite if nervous energy, walked over. "Ladies, is everything okay here?" "Yes," said the woman quickly. "There's been a mistake with our seat assignments. I always fly 1C on this route. It's a comfort thing." Denise didn't wait for Jordan to respond. She opened her ticket again and handed it over. "This is my assigned seat. I've flown this route every quarter for the past 3 years." Jordan examined it, gave a quick nod, and turned to the other woman. "Mrs. Payton, I see your seat is actually 2A, the window." Mrs. Payton's mouth tightened. "That won't work. I don't do windows." And I'm sorry, but I believe there should be some priority for loyal flyers. I've spent over 120,000 miles with this airline in the last year alone. Denise gave Jordan a look that said more than words. He cleared his throat. I understand, ma'am, but 1C is already assigned. If you'd like, I can ask someone in the back if they'd be willing to switch to 2A. Mrs. Peyton scoffed, then leaned slightly toward Denise, lowering her voice but not her condescension. You could be gracious about it, you know. You might be more comfortable in a different seat. Denise's voice was calm, her posture relaxed, but her eyes never left Peyton's. I am comfortable. Right here. That was when a low, familiar voice from a few rows back cut through the air like a warm blade. Ma'am, I think you're barking up the wrong tree. Both women turned. A few rows down, sunglasses pushed up on his head, wearing a worn leather jacket over a faded t-shirt, sat Vin Diesel. Yes, that Vin Diesel. Denise blinked, stunned for just a second. The rest of the cabin had gone completely still. Vin stood, adjusting the collar of his jacket as he walked forward, his heavy boots making a deliberate sound on the aircraft floor. You're asking a woman who earned her seat to give it up because you think you deserve it more? He said to Peyton. That's not how this works, and it sure as hell isn't how it should work. Jordan looked like he might faint. Peyton's mouth opened and closed, speechless for once. Vin turned to Denise and nodded respectfully. Don't let her take that from you. Denise smiled, a quiet gratitude in her eyes. I wasn't planning to. The energy shifted in the cabin. Peyton, flustered and fuming, finally allowed Jordan to escort her to 2A. She muttered something about entitlement going both ways, but no one seemed to be listening anymore. Vin returned to his seat, but not before patting the overhead bin above Denise's row. Some people think status gives them wings, he said, his voice low. But the real flyers? They earn every inch of sky. Denise didn't say anything back, but she held on to that line. Denise turned her gaze back to the window, letting the early autumn sky of Texas settle her nerves. Outside, ground crew moved with silent choreography beneath a soft haze of twilight. She closed her laptop and took a deep breath, the scent of brewed coffee and faint cologne still hanging in the air. The moment had passed, but the echo of it lingered, not just in her chest, but in the eyes of every passenger who had just witnessed something unspoken but deeply understood. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't needed to. And yet, she had held her space, unshaken. That mattered. That meant something. 15 minutes later, the plane had finished boarding. Jordan returned, offering a sheepish smile and a fresh cup of coffee. Ms. Whitaker, I want to personally apologize for the situation earlier, he said, lowering his voice. It shouldn't have happened. Denise accepted the cup with a soft nod. Thank you, Jordan. It's not the first time, and sadly, probably not the last. But I'm not in the habit of giving up what I've earned. His face flushed slightly, maybe from embarrassment, maybe respect. Well, for what it's worth. I think you handled it with more grace than I would have. She gave him a half smile. You're young. Grace comes with bruises. The engines began to roar, and soon they were climbing into the clouds. Denise reclined slightly, pulling her blanket over her lap, the day's adrenaline fading into fatigue. The cabin lights dimmed, and the hum of flight wrapped the passengers in a quiet lull. Somewhere behind her, a man sneezed. A child let out a laugh from economy. A flight attendant rolled a cart quietly past. It was almost peaceful, until she felt a nudge at her armrest. Peyton. Of course. She had leaned forward from 2A, her chin practically hovering above Denise's shoulder. I just want you to know, she whispered. That wasn't personal. I just have a routine, you know? I fly this route every month, and I need that seat. I hope you're not... Offended. Denise didn't turn. You needn't worry, she replied softly, eyes still on her screen. I'm not offended. I'm aware of exactly what that was. Peyton let out a small huff, clearly expecting gratitude or forgiveness. Maybe both. But Denise had nothing left to offer her. The rest of the flight was uneventful. Dinner was served, the lights dimmed further, and the plane rocked gently over the plains of Colorado. Denise dozed for a short while, her dreams full of overlapping memories. Her mother's laughter, her first job offer, the feeling of walking into a boardroom where no one looked like her and still owning the moment. When she woke, they were descending into Seattle, the skyline winking through scattered clouds. Mount Rainier loomed in the distance, timeless and still. As the wheels touched down, a quiet sense of closure settled in her chest, though she couldn't quite name why. It wasn't until they were taxiing to the gate that she noticed the message on her phone, a number she hadn't used in months. Call me. It's about the flight. Carla Manning was the director of corporate relations for American Airlines. They'd met once during a diversity panel at a tech conference in San Diego. Smart, poised, the kind of woman who always seemed to be 3 steps ahead. Denise tucked the phone into her blazer. She'd call after she landed. The gate opened and the passengers rose in staggered waves. Peyton pushed past without a word, her silence more revealing than any apology. As Denise gathered her things, Vin Diesel approached, wheeling a simple carry-on and wearing the same calm expression he'd had hours earlier. You handled that with more backbone than most folks I know, he said. I've seen some wild stuff at 35,000 feet, but that was the quiet kind of power. Denise shrugged, looping her purse over her shoulder. Some of us don't have the luxury of being loud. We fight quiet because we have to, but we still fight. He smiled. That's why it works. He extended a hand. Name's Mark, by the way. Most folks just call me Vin, but you can call me whatever you want. She laughed, a real, rich laugh, and shook his hand. Denise, and I think you already earned my respect, Mr. Diesel. They walked together down the jetway, past the waiting crowds and bright lights of SeaTac's terminal. Mark gave a nod and disappeared into the current of travelers, while Denise found herself dialing Carla as she approached baggage claim. Denise, Carla answered quickly. I'm so glad you called. Listen, I already got the report from the crew and, well, word travels fast. So I've noticed, Denise said, glancing toward the terminal doors. What's going on? We're looking into it. Passenger statements, crew behavior, the works. I wanted you to hear it from me. We take this seriously, especially since someone on board happened to mention that the situation involved you. Denise paused. Was it Jordan? He seemed shaken. No, Carla replied, then added with a chuckle. It was someone named Vin Diesel. Our comms team didn't believe it at first either. Denise smiled to herself. Well, I guess that settles it. Carla's voice softened. Look, Denise, this isn't just about a seat. It's about how we treat people when no one's looking. And I think your presence reminded everyone, crew included, that respect isn't optional. We'll be issuing an internal review and likely retraining. I'll keep you posted. Denise thanked her and hung up, then retrieved her suitcase and headed toward the hotel shuttle. The wind was cooler in Seattle, sharper than Dallas. But she welcomed it. It cleared the last remnants of tension from her chest. That night, she slept deeply in a downtown suite overlooking Elliott Bay, the neon reflections dancing against the glass. She didn't dream of confrontation or injustice or uncomfortable aisle seats. She dreamed of her mother's hands, strong, calloused, holding hers tightly. The next morning, she nailed the presentation, sealed the deal. By afternoon, her team was toasting her at a rooftop bar, while Puget Sound shimmered in the distance. The CEO of the partner company shook her hand with admiration, not the usual patronizing surprise she was used to. She had stopped being underestimated a long time ago, but moments like this reminded her why she had fought so hard to get there, and why she could never stop. Denise stood by the hotel window later that evening, arms crossed loosely over her chest as she watched the mist roll in from Puget Sound. The city below pulsed gently with light, streetcars gliding past late-night cafes and the scattered movement of people who had places to be, even after dark. Her presentation files were already stored neatly in her laptop bag, her schedule for tomorrow mapped out in neat, color-coded blocks. She should have felt triumphant. She'd stood her ground, then closed a deal that could change the trajectory of her company. But beneath it all, a quiet current of weariness remained. Not physical exhaustion, but the kind that came from years of being tested, having to assert her right to belong in spaces she'd earned 100 times over. She reached for the remote and flicked on the news, more out of habit than interest. A local anchor talked about early rainstorms and a city council vote. She muted the sound and let the movement play in the background as her thoughts drifted back to the flight. It wasn't Peyton that stuck with her the most, though the woman's dismissiveness still echoed. It was the way the flight crew had hesitated, the way their uncertainty had leaned toward the person who looked more like them. Not everyone meant harm. Not everyone even realized the roles they played. But harm didn't need intent to leave a mark. Denise had learned that truth the hard way, over and over, in boardrooms, in client meetings, even in quiet spaces like airplane aisles. It wasn't always about yelling or slurs. Sometimes it was a look, a pause too long, a question phrased just wrong. Sometimes it was just the audacity of someone thinking you didn't belong, and how often they found allies in that assumption. That's what tired her. That's what she couldn't afford to let slide anymore. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Carla Manning. "Can I give you a quick call?" Denise replied with a simple yes, and picked up on the first ring. Carla's voice was as clear and poised as always. "I just wanted you to hear it directly from me. We're issuing a formal apology tomorrow. Public. Not some corporate boilerplate either. I've made sure of that." Denise sat on the edge of the bed, letting the weight of Carla's words settle. "I appreciate that, but I don't want this to be about me. It's bigger than one seat, one flight." Carla exhaled audibly. "I know. We're launching a review of frontline training protocols. I've been pushing for that for a while, but this incident gave us the leverage to move fast. It's long overdue." Denise nodded slowly, not needing the reassurance but appreciating the effort. "And Peyton?" "She's already been contacted. Her status is suspended pending review. It's a start." Denise didn't reply right away. She stared out at the shifting fog beyond the hotel glass. "Make it count, Carla. There are 100 other women like me who don't have a direct line to corporate, who get brushed aside because no one's watching." "I hear you," Carla said gently, "and I'll keep pushing." After the call, Denise took a long shower and let herself exhale for real. She hadn't cried, hadn't even considered it, but something in the silence of the hotel room invited her to let down a layer she'd been carrying all day. She dried off, changed into a soft t-shirt and leggings, then climbed into bed, her thoughts already transitioning to tomorrow's meetings. She reviewed the slides once more, mostly for comfort, and then allowed herself to fall asleep with the city still glowing outside her window. The next morning, the conference was everything she'd hoped it would be. The room was full of potential partners, many of them skeptical at first. But Denise knew how to read a room, how to build momentum without overplaying her hand. She delivered her pitch with the practiced grace of someone who'd built her company from the ground up. Not with charm, but with data, foresight, and strategic clarity. When the final handshake came, it wasn't performative. It was earned. On the flight home, the seat next to hers remained empty, a quiet gift. The flight attendants greeted her with warm, if slightly nervous, smiles, and while she didn't need their validation, it was a small sign that word had traveled. She spent most of the flight catching up on notes, but halfway through, she glanced down the aisle and saw Jordan from the previous flight, now working coach. He gave her a subtle nod of recognition. She returned it with a small smile. Growth, she thought, begins in moments just like this. The story, of course, didn't stay quiet for long. Someone on the plane, maybe even Peyton, had taken a photo of Vin Diesel stepping in. And by the time the plane touched down, it had made its way to a fan account, then to a few viral news pages. It wasn't sensational. No one had recorded the confrontation, and no one needed to. But the caption beneath the photo was enough to stir conversation. Vin Diesel supports black woman standing her ground after being asked to move from her first-class seat. That alone lit the spark. In the weeks that followed, the story grew legs. Not because of Vin, though his public support on social media helped amplify it. It grew because the story reflected a deeper truth too many recognized in silence. News outlets picked it up. Think pieces were written. Morning talk shows asked the same questions Denise had been asking herself for years. Who gets to feel entitled? Who gets to be asked to move? Who gets believed? But the story didn't just expose discomfort. It invited a reckoning. The airline, to its credit, followed through. They announced new training protocols, launched a task force for equitable customer service, and even invited Denise to sit on an advisory panel. She declined the formal role, but offered to consult. Change wasn't a role. It was a responsibility. She wasn't looking to become the face of a movement, but she wouldn't shy away from being part of one either. One afternoon, while walking through the Museum of African American History and Culture in D.C. during a layover, Denise stood in front of an exhibit on Black women in leadership. A group of college-aged women stood nearby, discussing their own ambitions. One of them noticed her and whispered something to a friend. Moments later, she approached Denise shyly. "Excuse me," she said. You're the woman from the plane, right? The one with the seat?" Denise paused, then nodded, not used to being recognized but willing to hold space for the moment. "I just wanted to say, you made me feel like I can take up space too. Like I don't always have to say yes when I mean no." Denise smiled, the kind that starts slow but stays long after it fades. "You already can," she said. "Just remember, quiet doesn't mean weak, and grace doesn't mean surrender." That night, in another hotel room in another city, Denise opened her notebook and wrote one line across the top of a clean page. "We don't fight for the seat. We fight so no one thinks we don't deserve to be in it." Then she underlined it, closed the book, and leaned back with a deep, quiet breath. Somewhere out there, another young woman was watching. Another story was waiting to be told. And Denise Whitaker, daughter of a housekeeper, COO of a tech firm, and proud owner of Seat 1C, would keep making space. One flight, one fight, one page at a time. Olivia Carter, a black woman, was forced off the plane by 2 flight attendants without any clear explanation. They thought she was just another passenger. They had no idea she was about to change everything. The fluorescent lights of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport hummed softly as Olivia Carter strode through Terminal D, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The air carried the familiar scent of burnt coffee and hurried conversations. But today, none of it mattered. Today, every second counted. Adjusting the sleeve of her perfectly tailored charcoal blazer, she glanced at her Apple Watch. On schedule. A direct flight to Denver, just under 2 hours in the air. An easy trip, or at least it should have been. As a senior partner at one of New York's most influential corporate acquisition firms, Olivia had built her career on precision and leverage. The deal waiting for her in Denver was a turning point. Millions at stake. A merger hinging on her presence. She wasn't just closing a deal. She was shaping the future of an industry. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her leather carry-on as she reached gate D12. The moment she stepped onto the jet bridge, she felt it, an imperceptible shift. A tension she had learned to recognize over the years. A woman in her mid-40s, blonde hair pulled into a severe bun, stood at the entrance of the aircraft. The uniform marked her as a senior flight attendant, but the look in her eyes was something else. Assessing, calculating, doubting. Olivia had seen that look before. She ignored it. There were numbers to finalize, contracts to sign. She just needed to get to her seat, review her notes, and get to Denver on time. Row 2A, first class. Booked weeks in advance. She placed her carry-on in the overhead bin, settled into her seat, and exhaled. But before she could even open her laptop, the same flight attendant appeared beside her. Her professional smile stretched too tightly. "Ma'am, I need to see your boarding pass again." Olivia blinked. She had just scanned it. "Excuse me?" The woman's smile didn't waver, but the forced politeness made Olivia's skin prickle. "There seems to be a mistake. The seat is already assigned to another passenger." A pause. Olivia tilted her head slightly, voice cool. Measured. "No, it's not. 2A is mine. I booked it weeks ago." The flight attendant's expression barely shifted, but Olivia caught it. Irritation, the flash of something else. "Let me check with the gate agent." Without waiting for a response, she turned on her heel and walked away. Olivia leaned back, tapping her fingers against the armrest. This wasn't new. She had spent years navigating spaces where people like her weren't expected. Boardrooms where she was assumed to be an assistant. Meetings where she was spoken over, until she made it clear she was the one calling the shots. But this was different. This was public, and it was about to escalate. Minutes later, the flight attendant returned. This time, she wasn't alone. A male colleague, shifting uncomfortably, stood beside her. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we're going to have to ask you to step off the plane." A murmur rippled through the first-class cabin. Olivia's fingers tightened around the armrest. "Excuse me? There's been an issue with your ticket." He continued. "We need you to deboard so we can sort it out." The words were professional, but the tone wasn't. No discussion, no alternative. Just a demand. Olivia took a slow breath. "I'm not stepping off this plane until you explain why my confirmed seat is suddenly an issue." The flight attendant folded her arms, the pretense of friendliness gone. "You're being uncooperative." Uncooperative. She knew that word. A word designed to turn a reasonable question into defiance. A word used to frame her as the problem. The moment hung heavy. The silence in the cabin thickened. Then, before she could respond, the male flight attendant reached for his radio. "Security?" 2 uniformed officers arrived within minutes. The lead officer, a burly man with a tired expression, approached her seat. "Ma'am, please gather your belongings and exit the aircraft." There was no arguing now. She had a choice. Stand her ground and risk an unnecessary scene, or walk away with her dignity intact. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for her bag, stood up, and stepped into the aisle. Every set of eyes in first class was on her. As she turned, she met the flight attendant's gaze one last time. The woman didn't look triumphant. She looked indifferent, as if this was just another routine inconvenience. Olivia walked off the plane in silence. But this wasn't over. The moment she stepped into the terminal, the weight of what had happened settled over her. The fluorescent lights buzzed above, a dull contrast to the heat simmering in her chest. She had just been humiliated in front of dozens of passengers, dismissed as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. For what? A power trip? A personal bias disguised as airline protocol? She steadied herself, forcing her breathing to slow. Now wasn't the time to react emotionally. She had built her entire career on thinking 5 steps ahead, on never letting anyone see her falter. If they thought they had just put her in her place, they were about to learn they had underestimated the wrong person. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through her contacts, and found the name she needed. She hit dial. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Olivia? You're calling me at airport hours. This should be good." She exhaled sharply, a bitter smirk tugging at her lips. "You could say that." The voice on the other end didn't hesitate. "What happened?" She told him everything. Every detail, from the moment she stepped onto the plane to the security officers escorting her out. Her voice remained level, professional, but she knew him well enough to hear the shift in his tone. "Which airline?" he asked. Olivia let the name roll off her tongue. A pause. Then, "Give me 10 minutes." She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Appreciate it." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Already, she could feel the momentum shifting. The anger still simmered, but now it was mixed with something sharper. Control. Because Olivia Carter wasn't just another passenger. She wasn't a name they could erase from a flight manifest and forget about. She wasn't just in corporate acquisitions. She was a key player in it. Her network stretched from Wall Street to Silicon Valley, from hedge funds to corporate insiders. She knew who pulled the strings, and more importantly, she knew how to tighten them. The fluorescent lights of the terminal cast a sterile glow on the polished floors, their cold indifference mirroring the silence that followed Olivia Carter as she walked away from gate D12. Each step was measured, not because she was uncertain, but because she was calculating. She could still feel the weight of the stares from the passengers who had watched her being escorted off the plane. Some had looked away, feigning distraction. Others had observed with detached curiosity, as if watching another viral controversy unfold in real time. No one had spoken up. No one had intervened. She had been erased in plain sight. Power did not always announce itself in grand displays. Sometimes it was quiet. A shift in tone, an extra second of hesitation, a demand cloaked in the language of corporate policy. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about control. It was about reminding her that no matter how high she climbed, there would always be people who believed they had the authority to push her back down. But Olivia Carter had never been the kind of woman who stayed down. She lowered herself onto a sleek metal bench near an empty charging station, her movements controlled, her breathing even. Her fingers moved with quiet precision as she pulled out her phone. A single text lit up the screen. "Check your email." The number was unlisted, but she knew exactly who had sent it. She opened her inbox and found what she was expecting. An internal memo, forwarded from one of the airline's top executives. Subject: Urgent. Incident on Flight 382. The flight had barely been in the air for 20 minutes, and already corporate was scrambling to contain the fallout. Olivia allowed herself a small, knowing exhale. She could picture the scene unfolding in a glass-walled conference room. Executives pacing, hushed voices growing tense. Someone gripping their coffee a little too tightly as they frantically pieced together the story. They weren't worried about the inconvenience of a displaced passenger. They were worried because they had just removed the wrong one. Her phone vibrated again. "They're calling an emergency meeting. Give it 5 minutes." She smirked slightly. They were fast, but not fast enough. 15 minutes later, her phone rang. She didn't need to check the caller ID. She let it ring twice before answering. "This is Olivia." The voice on the other end, male, controlled but rushed, launched into the kind of corporate damage control she had heard 100 times before. "Ms. Carter, we were just made aware of an incident on one of our flights. I want to personally apologize for any misunderstanding." She let the silence stretch. Olivia had mastered the art of the pause. Silence made people uncomfortable. It made them fill in the blanks. When she finally spoke, her voice was even, precise. "Misunderstanding?" she repeated. "I was removed from my seat, humiliated in front of an entire cabin of passengers, and now that the headlines are coming, you're calling with a half-baked apology?" There was a nervous throat clear. "I assure you, We take these matters very seriously, the man said. We're already investigating. She cut him off. Good. Then you already know this isn't going away. A beat of silence. The shift was almost audible. He had gone from containing the issue to realizing the scale of the problem. Ms. Carter, we'd love the opportunity to discuss this matter privately. He tried again. Perhaps we can arrange a conversation with our senior leadership. Oh, you'll be having a conversation, Olivia said smoothly, but not with me. Another pause. This time heavier. I'm sorry? I don't need an apology, she said, her voice firm. I need your board of directors to get ready. There it was, the panic. She could hear it in the sharp inhale on the other end of the line, in the way his words came just a little too quickly. Ms. Carter, if we could just… She hung up. She was done talking. Now, it was time to act. She scrolled through her contacts and found the name she needed. She hit dial. The phone rang twice before a deep, confident voice answered. I was wondering when you'd call. She smirked. You heard. Your name is circulating in some interesting places right now, Charles Mendez said. And not just in aviation circles. The media picked up on it fast. An executive forcibly removed from a flight. They love that kind of mess. Olivia exhaled. Good. Because I have a proposition. Charles was a corporate predator, a man who orchestrated billion-dollar takeovers with the ease of someone ordering a drink. Olivia knew his reputation. He knew hers. This conversation was inevitable. I'm listening, Charles said. This airline stock is about to drop, Olivia said, tone measured. The PR fallout is only beginning. Once the headlines hit, investors will panic. The board will scramble to reassure them, but they'll be bleeding money before they know what hit them. And you want to be the one holding the knife? Charles asked, a note of amusement in his voice. She allowed herself a small smile. Not quite. I want to be the one holding the lifeline. She had been eyeing an investment in this airline for months. They were already weak. Mismanaged budgets, outdated policies, a leadership team resistant to change. Now they were vulnerable. And vulnerable companies were ripe for takeovers. How much control are you looking for? Charles asked. Enough to make the necessary changes, Olivia replied. I don't just want a stake. I want influence, seats on the board, decision-making power. That's ambitious. She smirked. You wouldn't expect anything less from me. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. I'll make some calls. Let's see how many shareholders are ready to jump ship. If the numbers look right, we move in, she said. I'll be in touch. The call ended. She tucked her phone away and took a slow, measured breath. Around her, the airport terminal buzzed with oblivious energy. People checking flight boards, dragging suitcases, sipping overpriced coffee. They had no idea that in a matter of weeks, the very airline that had dismissed her would be under her control. She wasn't just some displaced passenger. She was a force. A woman who had built an empire by turning obstacles into stepping stones. And now, she was about to own the airline that had tried to erase her. 2 weeks later, Olivia Carter walked through the same airport where she had been forced to leave in disgrace. But this time, everything was different. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She wasn't the woman security had escorted off a flight, humiliated in front of strangers. She was the new owner of the airline. The hostile takeover had happened faster than anyone expected. The moment news of her removal hit the press, the airline's stock nosedived. Investors panicked. The board scrambled to control the fallout. But no one wanted to be tied to a sinking ship. Olivia and Charles Mendez had waited for the perfect moment, moving in with the precision of a well-executed corporate strike. Within days, they had secured enough shares to control the company. One by one, the board members caved, knowing they had no leverage left. The previous CEO was ousted, the flight operations director resigned, and a full-scale restructuring was announced. Olivia wasn't just on the board, she was running the show. As she strode through the terminal, she could feel the shift in energy. This time, the space belonged to her. The same polished floors, the same overhead announcements, the same overpriced coffee shops. But nothing was the same. People moved around her, unaware that the woman they had watched being escorted off a flight 2 weeks ago was now one of the most powerful figures in the aviation industry. Her heels clicked against the floor as she approached the private executive lounge, a place she now had unrestricted access to. And then, just ahead, she saw her, the flight attendant, the same woman who had smiled as security removed her, the one who had spoken to her like she was an inconvenience. She was standing near the check-in counter, adjusting her uniform, completely unaware of the shift in power. Olivia didn't change her pace, but she made sure to be seen. The woman glanced up, and the moment her eyes locked onto Olivia, her entire expression changed. Recognition, fear, the weight of realization settling over her like a heavy fog. Olivia slowed just enough to let the silence stretch, watching as the woman swallowed hard. "You work for me now?" Olivia said, her voice smooth, steady, carrying a certainty that left no room for debate. The flight attendant's face paled, her lips parting slightly as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. I was just following policy," she stammered. Olivia raised a hand slightly, a gesture of dismissal. "Save it. I'm not here for an apology." The woman stood rigid, waiting for some form of retribution, but Olivia had no interest in that. Revenge was too small, too temporary. She wasn't here to settle a personal score. She was here to change the game. "I don't care about what you thought that day," Olivia continued, keeping her tone neutral, almost conversational. "I care about what happens next." She let the words hang in the air, heavy, with meaning. "You can either learn from this," she said, tilting her head slightly, "or you can pack your things." The flight attendant didn't move, didn't respond, didn't even blink. Olivia held her gaze for a moment longer before turning away, stepping into the lounge without a second glance. She didn't need to look back. She already knew the weight of the moment had settled. The flight attendant had felt it too. But this wasn't about humiliating her. It never had been. Real power wasn't about making someone small. It was about making them see they never held any power to begin with. Stepping into the lounge, Olivia was met with nods from executives, investors, people who now fully understood who she was. She had a vision for this airline, not just for herself, but for the passengers who had been dismissed, overlooked, treated as less than. That culture was about to end. This wasn't just about replacing leadership. It was about reshaping the industry from the inside out. Change didn't come from firing the wrong people. It came from hiring the right ones. From creating a culture where respect wasn't an option, but a standard. Her phone buzzed. A message from Charles. Press conference set for tomorrow. Time to show them what leadership looks like. She exhaled, setting her phone down. It was time. Leadership wasn't about sitting in first-class seats or having a nameplate on a boardroom door. It was about making the decisions that mattered when they mattered. And now, she was the one making those decisions. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she watched as another plane lifted off into the evening sky. The same airline that had dismissed her 2 weeks ago, now moving at her command. Some people spent their lives gatekeeping power. Olivia Carter had taken it, and she wasn't letting go. Lesson learned. Never underestimate the person you try to silence. Because one day, they might be the ones signing your paycheck. Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, sat alone near Gate 43 at Charles de Gaulle Airport. No entourage, no cameras, no uniformed aides whispering into earpieces. Just a man in a plain button-down shirt, dark slacks, and travel-worn shoes, quietly scrolling his phone as the first rays of morning light filtered through the wide glass panels of the terminal. He could have taken the presidential jet. He could have demanded a private lounge, security checkpoints cleared, or a motorcade from the tarmac. But that was not his way. Ibrahim Traoré believed that true leadership didn't demand attention. It deserved trust. And trust, he believed, was best earned humbly, in silence, among people. To passers-by, he looked like any middle-aged African traveler, Someone's uncle, a visiting academic perhaps. No one gave him a second glance. And he preferred it that way. He had just concluded a quiet but significant summit in Brussels. Long hours behind closed doors discussing Africa's mineral sovereignty and the future of the continent's independence from foreign influence. He had spoken plainly, without theatrics, telling European partners, Africa is not for sale, and Burkina Faso is not a playground. But now, back in the airport's cold stillness, he was just a traveler, a man eager to return home. The terminal bustled quietly. Businessmen murmured over coffee. Families herded sleepy children toward boarding gates. Flight attendants stood tall in immaculate uniforms, checking manifests and timing their smiles. And then, a new presence disrupted the air. Bernard Delacroix arrived. He was CEO of Euromin Energy, one of Europe's largest mining conglomerates, a man whose wealth came from the soil of West Africa. With a tailored gray coat and Italian leather shoes clicking against the tiles, he moved through the terminal like he owned it. Flanked by two assistants, he barely glanced at anyone, but everyone noticed him. When told that business class was full, Delacroix's reaction was swift and sharp. "That can't be," he said, flipping between French and English. "Check again." The agent did, then did again. The answer didn't change. "All the business seats are booked, sir," she said, voice tense but professional. "I'm not just a customer," Delacroix said. "I am a strategic investor in this region. I don't sit in economy." The gate crew exchanged looks. One of them whispered into a headset, calling someone from on board to handle the delicate situation. Claire arrived. Claire was a senior flight attendant, experienced, polished, and confident. She had handled everything from drunken executives to celebrities with attitude. She prided herself on discretion and order. As she entered the cabin of Flight 722, her eyes scanned the business class row. Polished, intuitive, sharp. Then she paused. Seat 2A. A man, black, alone, reading his phone, plain clothes, no jacket, no luxury accessories, just stillness. He didn't look the part. Claire leaned toward her fellow attendant. "Could be a mistake," she whispered. She approached him with the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sir?" she said, voice smooth. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" Ibrahim looked up and nodded. Without a word, he handed it to her. She studied it. The name was there, the seat number correct. But something about him, his look, his simplicity, didn't match her expectation of who should be in 2A. "Sir, I'm terribly sorry, but we may need to relocate you to economy. We're overbooked, and there's a guest with high priority needing this seat. We'll compensate you for the trouble." There it was, soft, corporate, and sharp. Ibrahim lifted an eyebrow, but his voice remained even. "And why me?" Claire's smile tightened. "No reason, sir. Just an adjustment." "A guest more important than me?" She hesitated. "We're making room for a strategic partner." "No," he said calmly, placing the boarding pass back into his shirt pocket. "I will remain in my seat." It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it echoed in the quiet cabin like a gavel strike. Claire blinked. Her posture stiffened. She was not used to being told no, especially not by someone who looked to her like just another passenger. Behind her, another crew member discreetly asked a young black man in seat 3B to switch seats, then another passenger in 4A. It became clear. Only black passengers were being approached, Ibrahim noticed. So did others, and someone else had been watching all along. Vin Diesel, the Hollywood actor known for muscle cars and family loyalty, sat just a few rows behind, trying to enjoy the anonymity of international travel. But as he saw the pattern unfold, his jaw tightened. He had met President Traoré once, briefly. at a UN youth conference. What struck him wasn't the title. It was the man's stillness, his eyes, a presence that didn't ask to be noticed, but couldn't be ignored. Now that man was being politely erased from his own seat. Vin rose quietly. "Excuse me," he said, stepping into the aisle. "Is there a problem here?" Claire turned. "Sir, please return to your seat." He shook his head slowly. "Number that man you're trying to displace. That's Ibrahim Traoré. He's the president of Burkina Faso. I've met him. And I think you just made a mistake." The entire cabin stilled. Claire's face went pale. A whisper spread through the rows like fire in dry grass. "Did he say president?" Someone murmured. Ibrahim remained seated, hands folded. Calm. He didn't need to speak. The truth had already done it for him. The cabin had fallen into a kind of stunned silence, the kind that stretches too long and grows heavy. Passengers turned their heads slowly, their expressions flickering between confusion, guilt, and dawning realization. Some whispered, others simply stared. Claire stood motionless, her mouth slightly open, as if Vin Diesel's words had stripped the air from her lungs. She opened her lips to speak, but nothing coherent came out. Vin hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. His tone was calm, grounded in certainty, and that made it land with even more weight. Ibrahim Traoré, meanwhile, hadn't moved. He remained in his seat, hands folded in his lap, his expression unreadable. It wasn't smugness, it wasn't satisfaction. It was something deeper. Stillness born of long patience, of years walking through rooms where he was first judged by the shade of his skin before the content of his mind. The moment lingered, uncomfortable and raw. Claire finally cleared her throat and forced a brittle smile. "Sir, I wasn't aware. We weren't told." She stopped herself, realizing too late how that would sound. Ibrahim glanced at her briefly, but his eyes carried no anger. Only clarity. "You didn't need to be told," he said softly. "You just needed to treat me like a human being." The words weren't loud, but in that quiet cabin they struck like a bell. The kind that tolls when something important has been said. Claire turned abruptly and walked toward the galley, her shoulders tense. A few rows back, Bernard Delacroix, the CEO who had demanded the seat, finally entered the cabin. He looked puzzled at first, then irritated. "What's the holdup?" he asked in French, brushing past a flight attendant. "Has the seat been cleared?" Claire met him halfway, whispered something quickly. Delacroix looked past her at seat 2A, his eyes narrowing as he saw Traoré. Then he scoffed. "This is absurd," he muttered. "We can't run diplomacy like this. There are priorities." Vin Diesel stepped forward, standing in the aisle. "You're right," he said. "There are priorities, and one of them is dignity." Delacroix looked him up and down, clearly recognizing him now, and said nothing. But the look in his eyes was one of bruised pride, the kind born from realizing the room no longer bends around you. The rest of the flight unfolded in awkward quiet. The crew went about their duties with forced professionalism. Claire avoided Traoré entirely, never offering an apology, only a glass of water served without eye contact. Delacroix sulked in his assigned seat in the back row of business class, visibly uncomfortable, mumbling now and then to his assistant in clipped tones. Traoré never said another word. He read for a while, then stared out the window, his fingers gently tapping the armrest in rhythm with his thoughts. Vin returned to his seat. Once, he caught Ibrahim's eye. There was no nod, no smile, but a look of mutual understanding passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that something meaningful had just unfolded, not by force, but by simple truth. As the flight neared West African airspace, the mood began to shift again. Outside, the clouds cleared, revealing the red earth and golden fields below. Passengers began to stir, stretching, adjusting tray tables, recentering themselves for landing. The pilot announced their descent into Ouagadougou, and the usual preparations began. But something was different. A few passengers glanced back toward Seat 2A with cautious curiosity. Others seemed to watch the flight attendants more closely now, aware that this wasn't just another flight. Then came the first ripple. Someone seated by the window muttered, "Military vehicles." Another leaned over, peering out. "Are those armed guards?" Whispers began to spread again, but this time it wasn't confusion, it was awe. On the tarmac, a full convoy had formed. Black SUVs, soldiers in ceremonial uniforms, government ministers standing at full attention in the mid-morning heat. Delacroix straightened his suit jacket, clearly assuming it was for him. He chuckled. "Finally," he whispered to Claire. "They've sent the proper welcome." She gave him a tight, nervous smile, but her eyes kept flicking toward Seat 2A. The plane landed with a soft bump and rolled to a stop. The engines hummed down. Before the seatbelt sign even dimmed, the cabin doors opened and a tall officer in a black beret stepped onto the aircraft. His boots struck the floor with deliberate authority as he walked slowly down the aisle, scanning each face until he reached 2A. He stood still, then raised his hand in a sharp military salute. "Mr. President," he said firmly, "welcome home." The silence in the cabin was absolute. Claire froze, her face paling. Delacroix's eyes widened in disbelief. A few passengers audibly gasped. Others simply stared, mouths open, caught between embarrassment and shock. Ibrahim Traoré stood calmly, his expression as composed as it had been at the gate hours earlier. He nodded to the officer, then turned briefly toward Delacroix and Claire. "I hope," he said evenly, "that you've learned something today?" He didn't wait for a reply. He stepped off the plane and was immediately surrounded by ministers, soldiers, and a small crowd of Burkinabe citizens who had gathered near the terminal fence. Cameras clicked. The sun caught his shirt, now lightly wrinkled from the flight, and lit up his face as he raised a hand to greet his people. He didn't wave like a celebrity. He acknowledged like a leader. Back on the plane, Delacroix tried to rise, but two officers blocked his path. "You will remain seated," one said. "There is a matter requiring your response." "What is the meaning of this?" Delacroix demanded. "I am a guest of this country." "No," the officer replied. "You were. Now you're a man under questioning." Claire shrank in her seat as another officer turned to her. "You too," he said. "Disrespect toward the head of state is not treated lightly here." She stammered. I didn't know." "I was following protocol." "You didn't need to know," the officer replied. "You only needed to be fair." They were both escorted off the plane under silent watch. No cuffs, no shouting, just consequence. Vin Diesel remained seated watching it all unfold. As the cabin began to buzz with speculation, whispers, and low conversations, he leaned back, closed his eyes, and let out a slow breath. He knew this story would travel far, across news cycles, across social media, across cultures. But for him, it wasn't about going viral. It was about something simpler. Sometimes, all it takes to change a moment in history is to stand up and say the truth, out loud. And sometimes that truth sits quietly in Seat 2A, waiting for the world to catch up. The blazing sun over Ouagadougou painted long shadows across the tarmac, where cameras flashed and reporters jostled for a better view of the unfolding moment. President Ibrahim Traoré moved through the crowd with quiet dignity, his steps measured, his face calm, unshaken by the chaos behind him or the thunderstorm building on global media. Behind him, Claire and Bernard Delacroix were quietly escorted into two separate black vehicles, their expressions blank, their confidence drained. There were no shouts, no resistance, only silence and the weight of realization settling over them. For the first time in their careers, they were not in control. No boardroom power, no polished smile, no frequent flyer privilege could shield them from the truth that had finally demanded to be seen. And the world was watching. Inside the government terminal, Traoré gave a brief press conference, surrounded by ministers and aides. His voice, firm yet composed, carried across microphones and broadcast feeds. He did not gloat, nor did he speak with bitterness. "Respect," he said slowly, "is not something you offer selectively. In Burkina Faso, we do not measure a man's worth by the price of his suit, the color of his skin, or the accent in his speech. We do not bow to colonial shadows. Here we bow only to dignity." The statement echoed not only across the press room but across the continent. Within hours, media outlets around the world picked up the footage. Social media exploded. "Respect Africa" and "Preen I Stand with Traoré" trended in dozens of countries. People shared the clip of Vin Diesel rising to defend a quiet man in seat 2A. Others posted side-by-side photos of Claire smiling at the powerful CEO, then being led away, her smile erased by truth. The public demanded accountability. Air Afrique scrambled to issue a statement, calling the incident unfortunate and promising an internal review. The wording was vague, the tone corporate, and it only fueled more outrage. Activists, influencers, and journalists from Nairobi to New York demanded deeper questions be answered. Not just about one flight, but about the systems that allowed this to happen again and again. In Paris, Delacroix faced mounting pressure as regulators and human rights organizations called for inquiry into Euromin's practices across West Africa. His lawyers argued for immunity, citing international business protections. But the Burkinabe Ministry of Justice responded clearly, "This is not a colony. This is a sovereign nation. He will answer here, under our laws, like any other man." Claire, meanwhile, was questioned at length by local authorities. In footage later leaked from the interview room, she could be seen wiping away tears, her voice trembling. "I didn't know who he was," she kept repeating. "I didn't know." The investigator across the table did not raise his voice. He simply said, "You didn't need to know who he was. You only needed to treat him like a human being." And that was the heart of it all. Back at the presidential palace, Ibrahim Traoré sat in his office, stacks of documents before him. There were roads to be repaired, youth programs to fund, infrastructure plans to oversee. The business of leadership continued, unshaken by spectacle. But something had shifted. The events on that plane had rippled into something far larger than a single incident. Across Burkina Faso, young people felt a new pride swell in their hearts. They spoke of a president who walked among them, who didn't hide behind glass walls, who faced insult without rage and responded with reason. In schools, children reenacted the moment Vin Diesel stood up, their voices firm, their eyes bright. In markets and cafes, elders nodded knowingly, remembering days when dignity had no microphone, when men like Traoré were told to keep quiet. Vin Diesel, still in the country for his charity work, gave an interview with local television. Sitting under a shade tree beside a group of school children, he spoke slowly. "I didn't do anything heroic," he said. "I just recognized a man I respect, and I couldn't stay silent while someone tried to erase him with a smile. I've been in rooms where I was judged by my tattoos, my voice, my past. But I've learned, when you see something wrong, say something, even if it's uncomfortable, especially then." Later that week, Ibrahim and Vin met again, this time at a rural school his foundation helped build. There were no cameras, no press briefings, just two men shaking hands under the open sky. One of the teachers, an older woman with gray in her hair and fire in her eyes, watched the scene quietly. "History doesn't always arrive with trumpets," she whispered to a colleague. Sometimes it walks in through row 2A and waits for someone to see it. In the weeks that followed, Burkina Faso passed new legislation requiring international airlines operating within its borders to undergo cultural competency training. A commission was formed to document and address instances of discrimination in international travel. Other African nations began to follow suit. Across the Atlantic, conversations opened in boardrooms and media circles, not just about racism, but about the subtler, systemic ways power decides who belongs and who doesn't. For Claire, there was no jail time. But she lost her job, and more than that, she lost the assurance that professionalism was enough if not paired with empathy. Her name became part of a cautionary tale, not of malice, but of indifference. The kind that slowly chips away at human dignity until someone decides to stop it. As for Delacroix, the legal battle stretched on. He faded from headlines, replaced by newer scandals, newer faces. But in West Africa, people remembered. Not just his arrogance, but the image of him standing stunned while a man he'd tried to displace was saluted by an entire nation. And Ibrahim Traoré. He continued to lead, not with a megaphone, but with resolve. He did not build monuments to the moment. He did not rename airports or release commemorative coins. Instead, he returned to his work with the same quiet purpose that had placed him in that seat on that plane. He taught his cabinet, his people, and the world a lesson they wouldn't forget. Not just about protocol, but about presence. Not just about identity, but about integrity. Because in the end, power doesn't shout. It listens. It waits. It stands its ground without raising its voice. And when the world forgets what dignity looks like, sometimes it takes a simple man in a plain shirt. A witness with a conscience and the courage to speak when silence is easier. That flight landed just once. But the story it carried will fly for a very, very long time. Everyone on the plane thought he was just an old man who had wandered into the wrong seat, until a voice over the intercom said, "Vin Diesel's father, please proceed to the gate." That was the moment everything changed, but it began long before that. Ezekiel "Zeke" Morgan stood quietly in the first-class boarding line at JFK Airport's Terminal 4. The din of early morning travelers filled the air. Clicks of suitcase wheels, buzz of overhead announcements, muffled conversations in multiple languages. At 67, Zeke was composed still, dressed in his Sunday best, a neatly pressed windbreaker, khakis, and a button-down shirt with a collar stiffened more by habit than starch. He didn't look like wealth. He looked like dignity, but in that space, among Rolexes, designer luggage, and silk scarves, dignity didn't count for much. Tiffany Holbrook saw him immediately. She stood behind the American Airlines first-class counter, with the poise of someone who'd long ago decided she was the gatekeeper of who belonged. Her scarf was tied flawlessly. Her smile was tight and precise, like a blade dipped in sugar. "Excuse me, sir," she said, stepping forward, her tone one notch above patronizing. "This is the first-class boarding line." Zeke nodded gently. "Yes, ma'am. That's what my ticket says." She extended her hand. He passed her the folded paper boarding pass. Her eyes flicked down. Seat 2A. First class. She paused. The truth was there, but her face betrayed reluctance. Still smiling, she said, "Well, just to be sure, I'll double-check the manifest. We've had some printing issues recently." Then, louder, as if for show, "Would you mind stepping aside, Mr. Morgan? We'll finish boarding the confirmed first-class passengers first." He stepped aside and watched. One by one, other passengers approached, men in crisp suits, women in heels and Chanel. To them, Tiffany offered wide smiles, effortless warmth. "Mr. Dempsey, welcome aboard. Can I take your bag?" "Good morning, Ms. Calloway. We've prepared your special meal request." "Oh, absolutely. Let me stow that for you." She leaned across the counter, laughed easily, nodded with reverence at black credit cards and expensive leather satchels. Zeke? Zeke stood to the side, invisible. When the final passenger had boarded, Tiffany gave him a slight nod. "Okay, Mr. Morgan, you may board now." No apology, no eye contact, no offer to assist. Zeke made his way slowly down the jet bridge. Inside the aircraft, he paused briefly, scanning for his seat. To a window. He hoisted his carry-on, a worn but sturdy duffel, toward the overhead bin. The handle caught on the lip of the compartment. He tugged. The edge scraped his knuckle. Blood rose just beneath the skin. No one moved. A flight attendant passed by, young, male, in a tailored uniform. He locked eyes with Zeke, saw the struggle, then looked away. Across the aisle, a white man in a sport coat stepped aside so the attendant could lift his suitcase and stow it for him. Zeke finally got his bag in place with a soft grunt. He sat down slowly, knees creaking from years of teaching drama in rickety high school auditoriums and folding metal chairs. No water was brought to him, no smile, no welcome aboard. He sat quietly. He thought of Delora, his late wife, Vin's mother. She would have chuckled. "Still teaching the world patience, Zeke?" He thought of all the kids he coached through lines they didn't believe they could remember, kids who wore too many burdens on too little sleep. He had never needed a spotlight. But watching this moment unfold, he felt its heat anyway. A pair of passengers seated behind him murmured something. He didn't hear the words, but he caught the tone. A chuckle, a sneer. Zeke exhaled deeply and closed his eyes. The cabin filled steadily. Tiffany passed through again, this time helping a woman in heels lift her Louis Vuitton carry-on. She smiled down at her. "Anything else I can help you with, Ms. Halber?" Then she turned to Zeke with a glance that barely skimmed his presence. The intercom crackled overhead. "Final boarding call for American Airlines Flight 105 to Los Angeles. Passenger Ezekiel Morgan and guest, please proceed to Gate 42. Heads turned. Zeke didn't flinch. He knew what was coming. The cabin door opened again. Boots. Leather jacket. A stride with gravity behind it. Vin Diesel walked on board like the space bent around him. The plane fell silent. Not because of celebrity, but because of something deeper. Presence. He carried no entourage, just a duffel and a stormy look on his face. He walked directly to Zeke. "Sorry I'm late, Pops," he said, pulling Zeke into a firm, familiar hug. Zeke patted his back. "You're here. That's what matters." Tiffany appeared, clipboard clutched tight. "Mr. Diesel?" she said, voice suddenly breathless. He turned to her slowly. "I didn't realize," she stammered, "that Mr. Morgan is your father?" Vin didn't blink. "He's not just my father, he's the reason I became who I am." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Vin's voice dropped, quiet but sharp enough to pierce steel. "You let every single person walk by with champagne in their voice, but you made my father wait, carry his own bag, struggle with his luggage while your staff watched." Tiffany swallowed hard. "I didn't mean—" "You didn't see him," Vin cut in. "And that's worse." Zeke placed a calm hand on Vin's arm, but his son wasn't finished. "This man taught theater to kids the world gave up on. He paid for acting classes out of his own pocket when we didn't have money for heat. He earned that seat. Probably more than anyone else here." Tiffany's eyes dropped to the floor. Vin stared for a moment longer, then looked at his father. "Ready?" Zeke nodded once. "Always." They sat together, side by side, and as the aircraft taxied down the runway, no one said another word to Zeke Morgan, but they all saw him now. The plane ascended smoothly through the dense New York sky, cutting into the morning clouds as if it had something to prove. Inside the first-class cabin, conversations that had once flowed freely now ran dry. Eyes that had earlier darted toward Ezekiel Morgan with skepticism now quietly avoided his gaze. Zeke didn't bask in it. He simply leaned back in his seat, his hands folded loosely on his lap, his book untouched. Next to him, Vin scrolled through his phone, then locked the screen, resting his head against the seat. He had said what needed to be said, and Zeke, in his quiet strength, had said even more by saying nothing at all. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was earned. The bond between them had never required words to be understood. A flight attendant, not Tiffany, approached cautiously. Her name tag read, Maria, and unlike the others, her eyes held no judgment. "Mr. Morgan," she said softly, "can I offer you anything? Juice, coffee, maybe some breakfast?" Zeke looked up, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "Black coffee would be great. Thank you, Maria." She nodded and disappeared, returning moments later with a steaming cup. "And something for your son?" "He'll want orange juice," Zeke said with a knowing grin. Vin chuckled beside him. He's right. Every time. Maria gave a genuine smile. "Let me know if you need anything." Zeke nodded. "We will. Thank you for your kindness." It was a small moment, but it landed deeply, not because it erased what happened earlier, but because it stood in contrast. A reminder that one person's decency can soften the bruise left by another's prejudice. As the flight stretched westward, Vin leaned over. "I'm glad you came." Zeke looked at him. "I told you, you didn't even have to ask." "Still," Vin paused. "Today's important." Zeke's brow lifted. "So what exactly is today?" Vin looked ahead, hesitated, then said, "They're naming the new Performing Arts Center after you." Zeke blinked. "After me?" "Yeah. The one in the Bronx. Right where the old recreation center used to be. The one you built from nothing. It's finished. The city's doing a whole event. Press, students, former alumni, even the mayor's coming." Zeke turned toward the window, quiet. The clouds below seemed to stretch endlessly, like a soft road paved just for him. "You didn't have to do that?" "I didn't," Vin said. "They did. I just gave them a little push." Zeke didn't speak for a while. When he finally did, his voice was quiet. "Do you remember what that place looked like in '88? No heating, holes in the ceiling, rats bigger than the damn stage props." Vin smiled. "Yeah, you gave us broomsticks and had us pretend they were swords." Zeke laughed, a deep rumbling sound that filled the space around them like an old jazz riff. "Because imagination was free, and courage cost too damn much." Vin looked at him. "You gave both." Zeke nodded once. "I tried." They flew in silence for a while, each lost in memory. For Zeke, the memories came in fragments. The first time he unlocked the doors to the rec center, the smell of fresh paint and borrowed costumes. The way a 12-year-old Vin had struggled with his lines until he didn't. For Vin, the memories were louder, more vivid. His first standing ovation, the pride on Zeke's face when he made it through a monologue without freezing, the nights when they had no dinner but a full rehearsal schedule. A sudden turbulence jolted the cabin. Just a brief shake, but enough to stir passengers. A nervous laugh came from someone across the aisle. The old man, who had earlier smirked at Zeke, now clutched his armrest like it might save him. Zeke barely flinched. Vin glanced over. "You okay?" "Son, after 30 years of working with middle school theater kids who forget every single line on opening night, this is a breeze." They both chuckled. Maria returned later with warm towels and a knowing look. "We'll be descending soon," she said. "Shouldn't be long now." Zeke nodded, but his mind wasn't on the landing. It was back on the ground, back in the Bronx, back in a time when none of this seemed even remotely possible. He looked at Vin. "Do they know?" "Who?" "The kids. The ones who'll walk into that building next week. Do they know what it cost? Vin was quiet. Number. And they shouldn't. They just need to walk in with their heads high, knowing that stage is theirs. That space is theirs. That someone before them fought to make it happen. They'll feel it, even if they don't know it. Zeke's eyes misted, but he blinked it away. You turned out all right. Took a while, Vin replied. But I had a damn good teacher. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, announcing the final descent into Los Angeles. Zeke tightened his seatbelt. The sun blazed over the wing, casting gold across the clouds. As they began to dip lower, the landscape of California spread beneath them. Mountains, highways, grids of rooftops. The contrast between sky and soil, dreams and struggle. A city that had chewed up and spit out 1,000 hopefuls, but had made space for one boy from the Bronx and the man who believed in him. As the wheels touched down, a soft cheer rippled through the cabin, the usual release of tension. The plane taxied toward the gate, and people began unbuckling, stretching, collecting their things. Zeke stayed seated. So did Vin. No rush. No need. Tiffany reappeared. Her face had changed. The confidence was still there, but it was muted, tempered by reflection. She stopped beside their seats. Mr. Morgan, she said quietly, I want to apologize. I was wrong earlier. About you. About everything. Zeke looked up at her. What did you think I was? She hesitated. I thought you didn't belong. And I'm sorry for that. Zeke didn't answer right away. He simply studied her face as if deciding whether the apology was real. Finally, he said, Sometimes the world teaches you lessons in ways you don't expect. Today was one of them, for both of us. She nodded slowly. Thank you. He gave a small smile. You're welcome. Just remember, manners travel farther than planes. Passengers began moving out. Maria stopped by with a hand on Zeke's shoulder. It was an honor, sir. He placed his hand over hers gently. Likewise. As they stepped off the plane and into the terminal, cameras flashed immediately. A small crowd had gathered near the gate, reporters, students, former alumni. A banner stretched across the railing. Welcome Ezekiel Morgan, the heart of Bronx theater. Vin leaned over. Told you it was kind of a big deal. Zeke laughed. You still could have warned me. You would have said no. Vin smirked. And you're not getting out of the speech either. Zeke groaned. You never stop putting me on stage. Because that's where you belong, Vin said. That's where you've always belonged. They walked together toward the crowd, toward the celebration, toward the legacy. And for the first time in a long time, Ezekiel Morgan wasn't asked to step aside. The sun was beginning its slow descent over Los Angeles, casting a warm amber hue across the city as Ezekiel Morgan stepped onto the pavement outside LAX. The applause hit him before he could even take it all in. Flashbulbs popped like miniature fireworks, and faces, some familiar, many not, beamed at him with admiration and gratitude. There were former students now grown and gray at the temples, others in college sweatshirts, and a few in full suits who looked like they'd stepped right out of downtown law offices. They had all come back for him. He had always taught them that the greatest stories are the ones that stay with you long after the curtain falls. Now, standing there beneath a banner that bore his name in bold letters, he realized they hadn't just remembered the story, he had become part of theirs. Vin stood beside him, proud but quiet, letting the attention fall where it rightfully belonged. Zeke wasn't used to this kind of spotlight. In the theater, he had always stood in the wings, holding the cue book, whispering lines, fixing props, giving hope. He'd been the quiet force behind hundreds of performances, the steady hand in the chaos of nerves and bright lights. But now there was no backstage to slip into. This time, he was the act. A black SUV was waiting, courtesy of the city. The driver opened the door for him with more reverence than most gave celebrities. As they drove through the streets of South Los Angeles, then east toward the Bronx Theater Annex, Zeke gazed out the window in silence. His heart beat slowly but heavily, like a drum that had been waiting its whole life to be heard. The theater was nestled in the heart of a neighborhood that had seen everything from riots to revival. It stood now freshly painted in warm tones of brick red and gold, with brand new posters on the front doors and lights that had been installed just last week. The city had done it right. They hadn't turned it into some sterile auditorium with polished marble and chrome finishes. They'd kept the charm, the old stage, the creaky floorboards, the character, the spirit. When they pulled up to the curb, another round of applause burst forth from the crowd gathered outside. There were kids holding signs that read, "Thank you, Mr. Morgan," others handing him printed programs with his photo on the front. He took one, held it in his hands, and stared at it for a long moment. "That's my high school picture," he muttered to Vin with a chuckle. "You look like you could have played Frederick Douglass and Malcolm X in the same damn play," Vin teased. "I did," Zeke smirked, and the two shared a laugh that came from a place deeper than memory. Shared struggle, shared growth. Inside the theater, the air was thick with emotion. The seats were filled, the lights dimmed, and, on stage, stood a podium. Zeke was guided down the aisle as the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation that seemed to stretch forever. He didn't wave, didn't bow. He just nodded with a quiet humility that said everything. They didn't cheer for a celebrity, they cheered for the man who had made them believe in themselves. Vin gave a brief introduction. Nothing grandiose. Just a few words about legacy, resilience, and the man who taught him how to command a stage before he ever set foot on a film set. Then it was Zeke's turn. He stepped up to the podium slowly, his fingers brushing its sides as if to steady both it and himself. "I never expected anything like this," he began, his voice low but clear. "I came to the Bronx in 1977 with nothing but a degree in drama and a heart that still believed art could change lives. Some people laughed, some ignored me. Most just thought I was wasting my time on kids who didn't want to be saved." He paused, letting the silence sit. But they were wrong. Every kid who walked through those doors was worth saving. Not because I said so, but because they had stories, real ones, hard ones, beautiful ones. All they needed was a space to speak them. That's all I did. I gave them the space. He looked out into the crowd, and his eyes softened. Some of you became actors. Some of you became lawyers. Some of you are raising families and paying bills and keeping your heads up in a world that still doesn't always see you. But I see you. I've always seen you. Another pause. He didn't rush. You don't need money or fame to be remembered. You just need to show up. Again and again. With love. With consistency. That's legacy. It's not what they put on your tombstone. It's what they carry in their hearts after you're gone. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Some cried openly. Others just bowed their heads, holding back tears with trembling smiles. When the ceremony ended, Zeke walked slowly through the theater, past photos of former students on the wall, past signed playbills, past murals painted by kids who had found their voices in this very building. One mural showed a figure on a stage with the words, "Speak the truth, even if your voice shakes," painted in bold strokes behind them. Outside, the evening air was cooler now. The crowd was thinner, but a small group remained. Among them was Maria, the flight attendant from earlier. She approached quietly. "Mr. Morgan," she said gently, "I just wanted to say thank you. I didn't know your story when I served you, but I felt it. You carry something. I could tell. Zeke gave her a warm smile. Thank you, Maria. That means more than you know. She hesitated, then added, I told Tiffany what you told me. About dignity, about how we treat people. She needed to hear it. Zeke nodded. We all need reminders sometimes. The trick is listening. She smiled and left, and Zeke stood alone for a moment beneath the theater marquee. Vin joined him holding 2 cups of coffee, black, just the way Zeke liked it. You did good, Pops, Vin said, handing him the cup. I didn't do it alone, Zeke replied, sipping slowly. You made sure they remembered? Vin looked out over the quiet street. They were never going to forget. Not really. Zeke nodded. Still, it feels good to know it mattered. It always did. The two stood in silence for a while, side by side. No cameras, no applause. Just 2 men. One legacy. One night, carved into memory. Zeke took a deep breath, as if filling his lungs not just with air, but with the weight and warmth of a life fully lived. Let's go home, he said. And together they walked down the sidewalk, past the kids still taking photos in front of the theater, past the mural, past the shadows of the past, toward whatever was next. Because sometimes, the greatest act you ever perform doesn't happen on a stage. It happens in the quiet moments after the curtain has already fallen.